So I wonder, have you ever been electrocuted? When I was about 10 or 11, my parents were decorating my bedroom. If you know anything about DIY, I don't, you take the covers off the various switches you're painting around them so that it makes them tidier, etc. And so one evening I walked into my room and I can remember reaching for the light switch and missing the light switch and then actually just touching the wires behind. I probably ended up looking something a little bit like that. Um, Kind of reminded me, not that I'm this old, but in 1889, there's a chap called John Feeks. And John was an electrical lineman and he was doing maintenance on all the wires in New York. He was 50 feet up in the air and he was busy cutting all the dead wires back. And on his way down, he came into contact with live wires and he absolutely just got fried. It was horrific. There were all these people that were all around watching as this poor guy just got absolutely, yeah, just fried up high. At that time, you see, in kind of the late 1800s, there were different companies lobbying for different businesses. They each had their own standards. You had DC versus AC. You had voltage ranging from sort of 100 volts to thousands of volts going through a wire. Different ways in which they could transport across short and long distances. And of course, very different appliances, different manufacturers, different systems, to the point that literally could go from one street to the next and end up being on a completely different supplier, different standards. And it was a little bit crazy. This actual event was something that's quite pivotal in the history of standardizing electricity in America and started to make it safe. It kicked off a major overhaul yeah, it was really kind of helped to move that inertia that was there. But of course, as you stand out and you're probably looking up, the picture's probably a slight exaggeration, but you can see all the crazy wires that are going across everywhere. And so in one sense, the problem is kind of obvious. Um, and I'm not sure for those of you who have seen Stranger Things, I think there might be a new series coming out. But there's the idea of this upside down within Stranger Things. And the idea is it's an alternate dimension where things are familiar and recognizable, but they're not. And they just appear to be a little bit more dangerous. And I think that's kind of like our software systems sometimes. We have these digital twin systems that operate our business underneath us in this new digital world. They tend to act in default behaviors to be siloed, and so it makes it hard for information to be shared. And it seems to cause all sorts of delays and costs to our organizations. So my name is Dan. It's really great to have you with us. I'm a senior manager at Valorum Reply. So Valorum is part of a network of companies in a large group called Reply, and we really specialize on sort of being best at what we do in software engineering practices. And in particular, within Valorum, we're focused on providing solutions for Microsoft technologies and services. And I'm excited today because I also have Vicky, who's joining me today. Are you there, Vicky?
Yep, I am. And thank you, Dan. And nice to meet you all. So my name is Vicky Gosling, and I'm the Deputy Director of Library and Information Services at the University of Portsmouth. And within my role, it spans across data, our applications, and our digital transformation portfolio. And we've been working very closely with Valorum Reply on our future integrations project that I will tell you a bit about later on. Thanks, Dan.
Super. Thank you, Vicky. And just a rough agenda of sort of what we're going to cover is just a brief look at our disconnected systems, just to kind of remind us and drive home probably why you're interested, hopefully, in the call. Why I believe the integration solution that you can have at the heart of your business can start to solve some of these problems. Why we believe that Azure Integration Services stands out amongst the competitions. You'll hear from Vicky about the real world case study. And then we'll look at just some practical steps just to how you get you started. You probably recognize, all of our organizations and departments look something like this. One of the things that drives there is that every team and doing their best has got their own objectives, their own specialisms, their own skills, their own ways of doing things. And that naturally creates this rub that we have. So it's really hard to collaborate between these because there's this natural different way of doing things. And you take something as simple as a customer. I've found that across these, there would be a different definition for what a customer is, for who they are, for what they are, even when they are. And then you imagine you lay on top of this that each kind of department is going to have their own systems. Some will be new, some will be old, some will be thought very highly of, some will absolutely hated. I'm sure we've all got those systems that we really don't like to use that are part of our organizations. Some are in-house, maybe in a server room next door. Some are based out in the cloud and are all modern and fancy. And of course, there's always that system that we seem to have that was brought in by the person who liked it so much from the last company they were at, and now we're all stuck with it. And as an IT guy, we also have a lot of systems which the rest of the organization doesn't seem to know exist or know what they do. And then finally, I'm sure you found this, you end up sometimes with these systems competing. There's great areas about the functionality that they cover. And so you end up with this, again, friction about which is master, which is best in covering that area. And of course, we want these systems to talk to each other. So sometimes this is manual. And if we get very fancy, we tend to automate it. If we think about what's happening in accounts, that relates obviously to expenses and to payroll. It's probably connected to our HR systems for new starters or tracking business objectives. And then you've got this whole joiners, movers, leavers process, which then needs to hook into IT because you want to make sure they get their kit set up and all the company accounts created. And so this all can kind of create problems. We've got all these different silos, all talking different languages and different codes and formats. If it's manual, you've probably got double entry as well. And of course, people can make mistakes. To lay on top of this, change becomes really hard. Changing a process, it feels like you've almost cast these processes into iron. They're really hard to change and move. You change one thing, it will break something for someone else. So the fundraising team have got this great new idea on how they want to run events and update their fundraising software or bring in something new. That might break how marketing or tracking their campaigns or kind of operating their programs. Operations might suddenly struggle to figure out how that means they manage their projects. So it's hard, it can be frustrating, and it can build up a bunch of technical debt as well. You end up with these systems that no one really remembers what they're there for anymore, but they won't just go away. And of course, our beloved favorite that we all have is our spreadsheets. I kind of think of our spreadsheets a little bit like children. We tend to love our own spreadsheets very much, even if they cause us hassle. But if you've got someone else's child who's misbehaving, you tend not to be very, very fond of it at all. Actually, Forrester wrote a report on this a couple of years ago and describes the state of this kind of fragmentation, a state of crisis. We are in a bad place. So this survey was done across 1,000 or so different companies, from small to enterprise scale businesses, mainly management and up to sort of C-suite, and sort of threw out some incredible statistics. So over 260 apps are on average in an organization. I mean, that's just bonkers. And there's 45 different applications that are used daily, 52 of our beloved children's spreadsheets all over the place. And we know that this has an impact. 30% of people's time is apparently spent in a day trying to find the right information and the right data. 2.5 hours every day of people not being able to find things. And I can attest, I was actually doing that this morning, looking for something across SharePoint. If our information isn't cataloged correctly, it just makes it really hard. And so these separate systems are actually driving that behavior. And of course, there's a people impact. It gets frustrating, doesn't it? If you can't find what you're looking for and it's in a different state and it's not in the right format, or that particular team hasn't considered the impact it has on you, it can be very frustrating. So what do we do? How do we change our direction? What are some things that we can do to actually impact this and make a change? And so I want to propose that actually an integration system at the middle of what you're doing can really encourage collaboration. And I think, as well as being the collaboration and the upside down, our kind of IT underworld, as it were, digital area, it also can encourage collaboration in the real world. So how do we meet with our colleagues in different areas and understand and share how we drive forward common standards and how our systems are working, etc. The basic building blocks of an integration platform typically look at a high level something kind of like this. You've obviously got some system where data is flowing from. So in this case, I've got SAP. It's probably got the data in its own way that it's handing off. We would then transform that into and translate it into some sort of common data model. We call that a canonical model. So it's just a model and a standard that kind of everyone that's talking to this agrees is in terms of the structure, the definitions, etc. You'd then figure out, well, where is that data going? So look at maybe 2 or 3 of the various places that want that information and the type of information they would like from it, and then you translate it from our common data model into whatever the area, whatever format they are looking for. So Oracle might be a database that you're sending this into, and then there might be FedEx if you're doing some sort of mailing or something like that. Of course, there's other things you can do with it as well. With AI and sort of being on everyone's mind and lips at the moment, there's a lot of things that you can do around data enrichment or analysis and that sort of thing that you could definitely pull into that as part of that workflow. And the other thing that this does is it starts to create an abstraction layer. And what I mean by that is you could probably start to think about how you could swap out different components around the outside of your integration layer without necessarily having to impact everything. If you know and can only figure out how to translate and integrate with the thing you needed through that integration platform, then kind of nothing else really needs to care. And so it starts to enable change and figure out how you can start to break these things apart and decouple the work. Great. Okay, that sounds amazing. But if you compare the spaghetti that we had before and the complete mess with like how do we start, it can kind of feels overwhelming. Like, where do you even begin to implement something like that? You'd probably say, well, you've not worked with the people I have, or you've not seen the systems, you don't understand the complexity. And I think for us, that's true. Everyone is different, but you don't have to eat the whole elephant. There's definitely a way in which we can think about how we approach this in a more manageable way. And a phrase I've heard before, I'm sure you've come across, I think there's a few books around innovation on this, but it's the idea of think big, start small, and move fast. So thinking big, and in my mind, is very much what's the end state? If you start to paint a picture and a vision about where you want to go, what are the benefits that drives for you as an organization? What does it drive for your team? What is kind of the key principles and strategic things you need to consider on your way there? There's very much a human element here as well. So who are going to be your stakeholders? How are you going to think about the funding of it? Who are your key influencers? Who's going to back up what you're doing? So that kind of thinking big part was, what's the art of the possible? But actually bring it back to reality and say, well, how do I start something really small? How do we get something out the gate very quickly? Start with maybe a simple proof of concept. It could be a small integration that is going to work. You could identify maybe a critical pain point that's causing lots of issues, or something that's is going to drive a high impact. And of course, then move fast is the idea of then just to go and try something, see it succeed or fail even. And the idea is if you try it small and it fails, then you're not lost anything. But learn how to try some things really quickly, find out where your success is, learn where your ROI can be driven from, and then you can start to expand out those learnings and grow. And so as you approach this step by step, it helps to reduce your risks, your upfront high costs. But of course, in terms of an approach about how do you start small and move quickly, you have to leverage the right tool set. So I've worked with several organizations in the past where they have very big enterprise products at the heart of their integration platform. And to be honest, the costs have been eye-watering. Kind of it reminds me of something like this. The product you buy off the shelf, it has a very high license cost. It might give you a discount maybe for the first year or two, but you only really end up using 10% of it. But ultimately, you're paying for everything. But this is kind of where I believe Azure Integration Services comes in. And in typical sort of fashion with Microsoft as well, is you really only paying for what you use. So what is integration services? So the Microsoft Integration Services is just a group term for bringing together a bunch of different services that they've got. You can use them as a pay-as-you-go. And typically, they help with this network of services to provide reliable messaging, kind of streamline workflows. And I'll show you a brief overview of that in a sec. Secure, unified access to services so that your data is not going anywhere that you don't want it to. And that kind of whole security comes out the box, as well as monitoring both the systems and any data anomalies that might occur. So if I just focus the bit on this that I really like and kind of draw out a little bit is logic apps. Now, if you're familiar with Power Automate and you've played around with any of the power tools, you might be familiar with this concept. But basically, at a high level, as any workflow kind of engine or tooling would have, is that it's pretty easy to understand. So you can kind of describe something in this way of actually what is happening in your integrations, but you could sit down with someone from a business perspective and actually talk through the process with them. That's a great way of being able to visualize that and actually talk it through. And at Valorem, what we also do on this is we'll write automated tests across these as well, so that as there's changes being made, you're running tests all the time to check and make sure that the quality of what you're doing is where you need it to be. I mentioned costs. So effectively, all these things, as happens in quite a lot with the Microsoft services, they come in a consumption model, which is pure pay as you go. And these way of kind of buying into the services means that you can just get started really small, and you can understand the application. You can understand where that fits in your organization. You can understand how you're going to build it, how it's going to work with the integrations that you need, at no risk to your cost base at all. You know, literally only paying for what you use. And then as you kind of build up, and maybe integration services starts to scale, maybe the number of integrations that you have goes up, or maybe the bulk of data and the speed at which you need to go through your workflows increases, well, then what you can do is step into a dedicated tier as well. So it kind of caters for both really, really nicely. And even though this is a pay-as-you-go model, though, I just want to kind of very much clearly call out that this is very much at the heart of the Azure platform. It's battle-hardened, and it's entrusted by enterprises across the globe. Impressive statistics across the ground. It's literally a core of what they do. And as well as that, you also buy into effectively what is the rest of the Azure service estate. There's over 200 different services now, ranging from things like Power Platforms that are related to various analytics. Big data is a big thing at the moment, and there's a whole kind of tool set around that, which is also in my space, called Data Fabric. There's AI, which comes along in various hooks that you can use. So there's lots of things you can kind of play with as well, just to see how that helps and supports you. But when you look at that and you step back, you might be thinking, great, we're talking about lots of little modules and services, almost like Lego bricks. And you think like, okay, that's great, but how do I build actually kind of what I need? It could be a little bit confusing and take you a little bit while. And while this is true, actually, these are building blocks and you can build what you need. It's kind of more like this. There are lots of different templates and what we call accelerators that have been built by Microsoft and also the wider community. So think of this as just a bunch of common practices that you would use that help you to get where you're going fast. So you can still customize everything as you need to, and you're not reinventing the wheel. But likewise, then you've got templates to just allow you to kind of crack on quite quickly. Valorem have got their own accelerator that we call Quick Connect. That's been in development over the last few years, really. And it, basically, at a high level, provides a bunch of different frameworks and tools and templates that allows you to go from building a concept to getting it to production very quickly. You know, thinks about things like observability and understanding and monitoring what you're doing, setting up your team for success, you know, best practices, etc. So that is something that we've built just to really help the organizations that we work with, just to kind of move quickly. And that was a very rapid kind of tour of what Azure Integration Services is all about. But at a high level, really think about it is it's got the building blocks for everything that you need. There's a lot, you know, in terms of compliance and security, it's kind of baked in, very much a pay-as-you-go model, so you can try it out. It's good in terms of like its global reach and where it's supported, it's everywhere. And it allows you seamless integration as well into kind of your Azure ecosystem. And I will now hand over to Vicky just to spend some time talking about her journey and experience with us. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you very much, Dan. So just to start off telling you a bit about the university, just as a bit of context, because I'm aware some of you are from completely different sectors. So at the University of Portsmouth, we have 26,000 students who are kind of our end customer, as it were. We have just over 5,000 staff. And in terms of some of the stats that Dan mentioned about number of applications, because we support learning and teaching applications as well as business applications, our application estate is over 500 different applications that we are having to manage. Our next slide, please, Dan. Thank you. So in terms of where we were then with our integration, so I started at Portsmouth just over a year ago now, and this is a project that had already started. It's probably been a couple of months in progress before I joined. And in terms of some of the background and reasoning as to the why we went down the path of Azure Integration Services and what we were dealing with. So previously, we'd implemented software AG web methods. So to Dan's point about a Swiss Army knife, very much kind of gold standard, had every function and feature that you could ever want, but we probably only used about 5 to 10% of it. So was costing us an awful lot of money. And actually, around the implementation itself, it was never really implemented as an ESB. And what we ended up with is this whole spaghetti mess of different point-to-point integrations, currently supporting between about 120 to 130 different point-to-point integrations across a multitude of different systems that support our kind of ways of working. Within that kind of ecosystem, so we've got multiple legacy systems whereby they have been implemented, and as Dan referenced earlier, by a certain stakeholder at a certain point of time, but universities tend to be quite risk averse, so the system's never normally got rid of because there's a certain need or a particular need and it then stays there and it grows. People come along, people then leave. We had a lack of documentation around some of these, and then you've lost all of that knowledge. Now, also some of our challenges were around our actual approach to developing our integrations with what I call here a hobbyist approach, with people choosing whatever really they felt like doing or wherever their specialism lay, that would be how we would go about developing it, with no real thought around kind of future-proofing it for us moving forwards. And the biggest pain point when I started speaking to our users was actually around how long integrations were taking to develop. And I was being quoted kind of 18 months, 24 months to develop one integration. So that told me that something was significantly wrong in terms of what we were doing in our current environment. And then the other piece, going back to cost around this gold-plated kind of system that we had, extremely expensive licensing. But also as well, because it was becoming legacy technology, getting the skills in terms of staffing when people did leave to replace them was very, very difficult. In the end, we'd have to go down a contract route, again, being very costly for us to support. So we knew that we needed something different. At that point, our CIO at the time had released our new digital transformation plan, which was very much a Microsoft first strategy. For the rest of our kind of business apps environment, it would be worth knowing we are currently a Google house. We're in the process of moving to M365 as part of that Microsoft first strategy. So there we were looking at what do we want to use to make sure we can get the benefits of having a fully integrated tool set that works alongside M365 that would then open up wider benefits to the organization. So what did we do in terms of our problem? We went out and we decided that we needed to find a skilled Microsoft partner to work with. We had no knowledge or expertise in-house really around any of the Microsoft stack at all. Based on how the current ESB was built, we knew that actually we needed some expertise to help us really in that architecture and design piece, as well as the implementation. Alongside of that, because of the team and kind of where they were and how they were working, we really need to focus around the people aspect of this. And I think this is really important because it's not just about the technology, it's about the people aspects. Because if you have the technology, it's great. If you haven't got the people to be able to support it or work with you on it, then that's where you're going to fail. So we really wanted to find a partner that would help us on that journey around changing our ways of working, adopting Agile, looking at bringing in CI/CD pipelines to be able to automate a lot more of this, and then not have as much reliance around kind of the people side for that support, and really streamlining those operations to make sure it wasn't taking us 18 months to develop them moving forwards. And as well, because we were kind of so far behind in this area compared to other institutions across the sector, we really want to look at what could our approach be to really accelerate adoption. Because as Dan said, when you tackle something like this, you go, oh my gosh, this is a mess. This is huge. How are we going to do it? But again, think about how can you use things like Valorum Replies Quick Connect Accelerator to actually go, okay, we can really quickly put in those foundations so we can get cracking and really get started and get our teeth into learning both the new technology and moving forwards. And next slide, Dan. So where are we at the moment then? So the project's been running for a year. From our side, I would admit we haven't perhaps got as far forwards as we thought we would, but that, from my perspective, isn't related to the technology. It's related to those people aspects, and you can't underestimate the amount of change it is for the team. So if I take my technical integrations team, for example, they were having to learn how to work using Agile. They'd never worked using Agile before. So all of the concepts, all of the processes, all of the ceremonies and meetings that come alongside of it was quite a big change for them to transition to. Along top of that, learning a new technology stack. And Valorum have been really good around working with us around how we can bring in and use their knowledge to do knowledge transfer to the internal team to really boost their skills and boost their development, alongside kind of doing it for real. So, learning on the job, setting them tasks, setting them challenges to do, rather than saying, go off and do a course, then come back, then you can get started. How do we help and work each other? And that's worked really, really well for us. As part of that, we've been working as a hybrid team. So we have our team of devs working directly alongside Valorum Reply's team of devs. Initially, we had it as kind of more shadowing, so like 80% shadowing, 20% worth of them doing the development work. And slowly we're seeing building up of their confidence, and we're able to shift that to some of our devs now starting to work in more of the 50-50 model or the 60-40 model as we go through. And it's been really great to see that progression. So to date, we have one production interface. As I say, progress has been slower, but don't underestimate those people concerns. But we do currently have 25 in development in parallel. And because of the tools, the techniques, the processes that we've put in place, we are able to do that and have that focus split across and take a more cohesive approach to how we design and move forwards. And then we still have 38 to go. So for us as a project, this is quite a big investment, quite a big undertaking. But once you start moving and seeing the benefits and seeing what you can do, we will then start really accelerating and looking at how we can then start taking over the full development and use Valorum to really provide the expertise where it's needed to help support us fully transition then to business as usual. And so kind of thinking ahead in terms of where we want to get to then. So really what we wanted to be achieving was having our fully streamlined development and testing processes. So automated testing was a new one for us, for our test team to learn, and actually how we embed testing within that development team. We're seeing improved productivity of the integrations team. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what that turnaround time becomes, based on 18 months, can we get that down to 6 weeks, 8 weeks? How do we make sure we're delivering value earlier to our customers that we have out there? Our license cost savings. So again, as Dan said, this is a model whereby we're still learning. So the consumption model for the university is very, very new. We haven't got any other services that work in this way, but we are starting small. We're monitoring it. We're looking at how we scale up to then understand that, to build that into our budgets. And at universities, it's quite interesting. So we work on an academic year. We have a very rigid budget cycle. So that's something quite new in terms of a different way of approaching, particularly revenue spend aligned to consumption models that the wider organisation are having to get to grips with and really adopt. But actually, this approach enables us to do it in a safe way that we can monitor, and we can then build up that confidence to hopefully in future bring on more services. And the other key piece for me is around this increased supportability and resiliency. So as I mentioned, we struggled to find the expertise to be able to do that development and support. This is a massively growing area. There's a lot of others that are adopting it, and there are a lot of skills out there for us. So that really helps in terms of giving me the confidence that we're building a platform that can be supported moving forwards, particularly when we do get wider changes in staffing within those teams. So just a couple of takeaways then to finish off from me around what we've learnt so far. So I think the key thing for me is around how you really can go about doing this in a way that really empowers your team. So building their knowledge, aligning their development, and making them feel ready and able to go on and succeed and start looking at that broader tooling that is available within there. One of the biggest wins for us will be around reducing that environment complexity. So going from the 120 to 130 down to kind of 60, 70-ish integrations and interchanges moving forwards, and completely thinking about it in a different way to make sure that we are future-proofing it. So Within universities, we do tend to change our systems quite often. As Dan says, we'll get a new member of staff in who will have a favourite HR system, for example, they might have used, but setting it up in this way means that we can make that change with then having to do a lot of other rewrites in there. So it's going to make it a lot more simple for us to support moving forwards. And overall getting to that nirvana for me, which is around faster deployment, because the power of data and how we integrate really, really does make a difference as to how we can be more flexible and more agile in our operations moving forward. Thank you, Dan.
Super. Thank you so much, Vicky. It's really been encouraging from our team's perspective as well, working with you. I think we've both found it an incredible partnership. So thank you. And in terms of wrapping up, it's obviously hard because that's why people are here, right? We would have no one attend if this stuff was easy. And it's hard because I think things are complex. When it's hard to see the wood for a tree, we just don't know where to start. We know that we have cost pressures and budget pressures, and so tend to think of these things as very big and very expensive. I'm also aware that everyone is very busy, and so even just giving the time investment feels large. And then finally, like I alluded to in the beginning, is that everyone tends to talk a different language if you're across different departments and different ways of working, etc. So we can find it hard to try and figure out how we bring those things together. But actually, from a cost perspective, you're really only paying for what you use, particularly with kind of the Azure Integration Services. I would encourage you to go and find a value use case where you can prove this out and demonstrate kind of time to market and see the value that it releases, and try something small, something quick that you know that you can move on. And finally, I'd say very much, we talk about this as a technology problem, but actually it's probably far more around the people side. I think Vicky alluded to that as well already. So being able to figure out how we can work better and more collaboratively within our organizations will naturally start then to help this process as well. In terms of how we can help, so Valorum Reply offer a complimentary deep dive day. So we're more than happy to spend some time with you and your teams and literally just come and just see where you're at. There's no obligations on that. If you'd like to tap us up, we're more than happy just to come and spend some time and just help you to understand. There was also opportunities for funding from Microsoft for certain ventures. So every now and again, we'll just have a look and see if there's something that lines up and the stars align. We can definitely see and explore that with you as well. And also just think about, we have quite a little a simple little framework around what we call concept to value. So from your first idea and how you actually translate that through to something that will actually work. So if you need help supporting you with business cases, etc., then we're more than happy to kind of help you there. You'll have been seeing that I've been throwing up some QR codes through the presentation. There's just 3 at the end that I'd probably just call out. So if you want to learn more about Logic apps that I mentioned earlier, there's a QR code that takes you some reading. If you'd like an interactive self-learning guided through tour, probably more for like a techie team, devs or maybe engineering managers, that sort of thing, then there's a self-learning course that you'll just kind of help to take you through the step-by-step process of how do you set up something in integration services. And finally, find us at Valorum Reply.